So it's a very long story. But basically, last February, she was in her gym class and she tripped on some netting that was left on the floor while they were playing tag. And I found out about this because I got a call from the nurse. And when I got a call from the nurse, she said, Izzy fell in gym class, and I don't know why she's still crying, but I think you better come get her. And I was like, well, if she's still crying, it's probably because she's really hurt, and yeah, I should come get her. So what I later found out was that she had been brought to the nurse's office and left in a room by herself for an hour before they bothered to call me. Even though when she fell, there was a loud popping sound. She actually dislocated her hip, which we didn't find out for months because it popped back in as it twisted out and then popped back in as she fell back down to the floor.
How old is she at this point?
She's 14. She was 13 when this happened. Um, yeah, so anyway, I went to pick her up, and so my daughter she's a really tough cookie. She broke her arm when she was in second grade, and never a tear was shed. She didn't even want to go to the doctor. She just said, I'm going to drink lots of milk. It'll get better. I'm fine, Mama. So I knew something was really wrong because she was just like just crying. The nurse couldn't figure out why she was so upset. So we went off to the Dutchess emergency department, and they ran an x-ray and they didn't see any broken bones, and they said, oh, it's a muscle strain. And I was like, it's not a muscle strain. I mean, it was clear it was not a muscle strain. You know, I've been a yoga dance teacher for 20 plus years, and Izzy's a dancer and does karate and all kinds of things. It was definitely not a muscle strain. I know what a muscle strain looks like. So they sent her home, and she was literally dragging her leg. She could not pick the leg up at all. It was dragging behind her. She was in excruciating pain, could not move at all, had to be physically moved everywhere. And she came home, went on her couch, and that was the last time she was able to move at all normally until she ended up having a total hip replacement about a year later. So in the meantime, between that and the hip replacement, we went through all kinds of crazy drama of going to see specialists and doctors, none of whom could figure out what was going on until we finally brought her to Shriners Children's Hospital. And the doctors there were just more knowledgeable. And right away, the orthopedist that we went to see, he took a look at her symptoms, and by this time the top of her bone had begun to die off. The femur had just begun to collapse, and he said, oh, it looks like she dislocated her hip. You know, like he said, this happens sometimes with people who are young and flexible, and doctors don't catch it because they're not all aware that this can even happen. So at that point, he said, let's wait and see. It should start to heal on its own. It didn't. It just kept getting worse. And about a month later, we went back, and he said, we need to start looking at surgical options. So he set up a preliminary surgery, which was really just to go in, clean it up, repair the labrum, and try to figure out what exactly was happening. So we did that, and last summer was, you know, she was able to walk with a stick, but any kind of long distance, or she needed a wheelchair, basically. She was wheelchair bound since she injured herself, for any kind of distance that wasn't like crossing a room in a house or something. But she was functional, you know, like pain, but functional with the pain, just not normally functional. So we had the surgery in August, and then we went back a month later for her post-op evaluation, and they looked at her x-rays and saw massive deterioration in her cartilage. And at that point, she was diagnosed with something really rare called chondrolysis, which is basically just rapid deterioration of the hip. And we were told she couldn't get a hip replacement because she's too young. And basically, the only options were to wait. And, you know, initially we were told she might have to wait until she was 18 to be able to get any kind of relief, which was just shocking and horrifying to me, that they were basically saying she was going to lie around in bed until she was 18 so they could do something because they didn't want to operate on her. And then what happened over the next 2-3 months, 2.5 months really, was a rapid decline. She was in PT, and it went from the point where she was able to walk with crutches, she was able to somewhat function, do schooling in bed, to she was in so much pain she could not do anything. I had to help her get dressed. She couldn't move without excruciating pain. I'd take her to physical therapy and she'd just be in tears the whole time. It was horrible. And it was clear she was getting rapidly worse. And really awful, because the physical therapists, I think, were very nice people, but they did not understand the condition. It's very, very rare, and I think they had virtually no experience working with it. And they kept, throughout this whole process, people treated her as though she was making this up. Like, to the degree that we had what rheumatologists tell her, she had amplified pain syndrome, and she needed to just tough it out. So anyway, that was going on as we were doing our PT, where she's just in tears. And this is a child who does not cry. She's tough. And it just kept getting worse until, like I said, I finally just discontinued the physical therapy because it was horrible. It was just excruciating for her, and I couldn't imagine it was doing any good at all. So at that point, we went back to Shriners, and he took another x-ray, and the deterioration at that point was so severe. It was so shocking on the x-ray that he pulled us back into consultation and said, okay, she can get a hip replacement. Like, she needs one. There's no way she can live with this for the next, how many years. At that point, we were both like, thank God, because as much as you don't want your kid to have a hip replacement at 13, you also really don't want your kid to have to live in pain for their entire teenagehood without being able to get out of bed, which is essentially how she spent like almost a year of her life, was in bed, in constant pain. So then we entered into an epic insurance battle, trying to get our insurance to cover surgery with her doctor through Shriners. Ended up driving to Boston only to be told that the insurance company would not actually cover the surgery in Boston. So we came back here, and I spent probably 3 weeks every day, all day, on the phone with insurance companies, doctors, hospitals, trying to find someone who was willing to do this surgery in an emergency way to get her some relief. And we finally were able to connect with a doctor up in Albany who ended up doing the surgery in December. So she had total hip replacement in December, came home, had a bunch of crazy complications, including like stopping breathing and all kinds of crazy stuff, because she was not given proper medications or treatment after her surgery. And since then, it's been recovery. She's been slowly recovering. Actually, it's been very interesting because she was in PT, before everything shut down, and then I pulled her out once everything started shutting down, and she's actually healed a lot since then. And I think in some ways it's like her body knew how to heal better than the physical therapists knew how to help her heal, which is strange. But anyway, so she's, she continues to heal. She's able to do more all the time. And I am so hoping that this replacement lasts more than 10 years, which is like, for someone her age, they don't have a real long lifespan. And they start deteriorating, and then she's going to return back to the same issues that she had before. So it's changed a lot, permanently. it's changed a lot for her because she's never going to be able to go back to most of the things she was doing before she injured herself. So, yeah. Anyway, it's a long saga and we'll continue.
What's it like when people ask you to recount this story in such detail? How does that feel each time um, tell the story and talk about it and kind of relive it?
Well, it's interesting. I don't actually tell this story very much, and maybe that's because we've been I mean, one of the things about having a kid that's sick or suffering is you're isolated. I don't talk to people. And because coronavirus sort of came on the tail end of but we're recovering, we're starting to maybe move back out into society a little bit, and then everything shut down.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't our family is very insular at this point. We don't talk to a lot of people. I don't have a lot of contacts that I've really stayed in touch with. And the other thing with the lengthy injury is people stop wanting to hear about it. They really do, and you understand that. Nobody wants to continue to hear about someone's struggles that go on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't actually had very many experiences of trying to recount the whole thing. I did have a weird experience the other morning, or I guess it was the middle of the night. I woke up and just had this memory of the night before she got her surgery was just one of the worst nights I've had in my life. We had gotten, because the surgery was an emergency surgery, they had a last minute opening, everything was rushed. We got to the hospital at 10 in the morning to run all the tests, and the plan was to stay the night. They have a attached housing for people who need housing before surgery. So the plan was to stay the night there and then do surgery the next day. Well, the insurance company, I was assured that everything was fine, and then at the last minute, the insurance company was like, no, we have to it was just, they gave me the runaround. So we were there at the hospital all day, and all day I'm calling their billing department. Have you heard from the insurance company yet? Have you gotten the approval? And they knew it was an emergency. They had already, because of the situation in Boston, they had already deemed that it was an emergency that needed to be done and cleared the cost. But they hadn't cleared this specific instance of the surgery. So they were saying, no, you have to give us 2 days. And the hospital was saying, we can't give you 2 days. We have this opening. She needs to have this surgery. You have to clear it today. So those calls went on. And then around 4 o'clock, I guess, it was clear that nothing was happening. And I was starting to panic because I didn't know what to do. If they didn't approve the surgery, then what was I going to do? We were going to have it and then just take the chance that we would owe huge amounts of money to the hospital or cancel it, and then who knows when someone could have done the surgery. It was horrible. So I got on a conference call with the head of the billing department for the hospital and the insurance company, and the three of us were just alternately yelling and crying and trying to figure this out. I was there until 10 o'clock with Izzy there with me in her wheelchair, just desperately trying to get something figured out so that she could have this surgery. And it was a horrible, horrible night. And I was by myself with her, trying to keep her calm, but I kept crying, and it was just awful. Anyway, so I had this weird experience where I woke up and I just remembered that experience of being there and feeling so alone and just scared and not knowing how to take care of the situation and being so weary from trying to figure everything out with no help. Just it felt like there was no help from anywhere. And just that experience of waking up and feeling that for the first time, I think, because I really just blocked it all out, as after the surgery and everything. The next weeks after the surgery were pretty traumatic because, like I said, she had a lot of complications. And I think moving out of that, I just shut it all out because it was just too traumatic to try to revisit.
Talk about the experience of knowing that something is wrong and then getting information and feedback from doctors and specialists and school nurses and everybody. You know, there's like a disconnect between what you know as a mother, you know stuff, and then the specialists are telling you stuff that you know is not correct. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, thank God we kept looking, thank God we kept moving from doctor to doctor, I guess is what I keep thinking, that thought process of like, what if, and I keep thinking, what if I hadn't kept changing doctors? What if we had just stuck with like the idiots that we first saw? And it was, I'm sure you experienced something similar, but it became all about the tests and the images, and the doctors you'd go in and they'd put up these images and start explaining the images. And I kept saying, well, that may be what the image looks like, but this is the experience. Like, this is what is actually happening. And, living with your child and taking care of your child and seeing the like three-dimensional effects of something on your child is so different from looking at a potentially flawed image and trying to draw conclusions, especially in her instance, the things that happened to her with the dislocation and whatnot are not things that would show up easily on an image, which I wasn't told until like months later. But I think what was so horrible was the way she and I were treated, but particularly her, that she didn't know her body and that, she didn't understand what was wrong, and, all of these underlying assumptions in looking at test results, and like, because the doctors didn't know how to treat her or what to treat her with, it was like it was foisted upon her that the issue must be her because they couldn't figure it out, which was really disgusting. And, as a mother, all you want to do is protect your kid, and to see them being blamed for when they're hurting so badly. Itzy was, before she was injured, she has a black belt in karate. She was dancing 3 or 4 times a week, an extremely physical child. And to have that all just taken away from her, probably forever, And I don't know if this happened to your daughter, but also the loss of social network, like initially she had friends come and visit, and then it, like I said, people just, after a few months, it was like she lost her friends, she lost her social network, people just moved on. It was too painful, I think, for other people as well, So that sense of loss was huge. And then to be confronted with, this isn't really happening, this is all in your head, for her, she felt guilty for months. She kept saying, what if I just push harder? What if I just push harder? What if I can walk, I'm just not pushing hard enough? This constant question in your mind. And then as a mom too, going, I know this to be the case, and yet I'm being told by people who know more than me that it isn't. And that constant questioning of yourself, just, and I'm angry that I fell for it as much, I'm angry that I didn't advocate sooner, because she had clearly dislocated her hip. She had symptoms of that from the start, but I was told that couldn't happen. So she was never treated correctly, Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of anger, I guess, at multiple things, at the school system, the nurse, like the way that they didn't respond correctly, the way she was treated, the way I was treated, and at myself for failing to be more aggressive, which maybe could have saved her hip. I don't know,
What will you do next time, or what do you wish other mothers in your position would do when they're in your situation?
Well, this is going to sound really enlightened, but don't waste your time with stupid people. I mean, honestly, if there's anything I really wish I had done, it was go straight to the experts right away. Like, just skip all the local people, none of whom knew anything about what they were totally useless. And I think we wasted a lot of really valuable time. And, when you're talking to someone and your gut feeling is they either don't care or they don't know, then just don't bother. Don't waste your time. Because I do think, and I had this experience when I was pregnant as well. I had toxemia with both of my kids. And when I developed it with my daughter, I was told at the beginning of my pregnancy, well, you can't really, get toxemia twice with the same partner. It's not going to happen, blah, blah, blah. And I knew, I had it before. I knew how it felt. I was like, something is really wrong. I went in for an emergency appointment, and the doctor examined me. She said, I'm an expert in toxemia. This woman was like in her 20s, clearly never had children. I'm an expert. It's my area of expertise. You don't have toxemia. You're depressed. I'm going to prescribe you some Prozac. And I was hospitalized 3 days later and sent up to Albany Med in an ambulance because my numbers were so bad. And that was one of those experiences where I was like, I knew, but here's this doctor saying I'm an expert. And so you trust them because they say that. And I think as a mom, certainly for our own bodies, but I think for our children's bodies too, we know, we know when something is really wrong. And it's a shame that we aren't encouraged or listened to, and that we can't trust that more.
Yeah, I've been looking for words and kind of trying to study and understand that sort of phenomenon. I guess it's a phenomena only. I don't think it's as much of a phenomena as we think it is, but I use that word because I haven't found any words for that knowing. Like, how do moms know? They'll say, oh, well, a mother's intuition or instinct or something. But there's something beyond that. I found, like, one example is like mirror image synesthesia, where people who are empathetic or maybe trained as artists, and I think also people who are in touch with their own bodies as dancers and artists and movement people, can have this ability to experience your children's pain and feelings by looking at them. There's something where you see your kid in pain and you know what it feels like. You can tell.
Well, I mean, as I was listening to you, I was thinking that it's probably in some way biological also. Studies that I've read that talk about like the bacteria that inhabit you that actually come largely from your mother. Because, like even your mouth, like kissing someone will actually change the bacteria. And I just wonder how much, there's a lot we don't understand in science, right? So I don't think it needs to be this sort of, it's some sort of weird through the air thing. I think it's part of how we biologically function, and that would make sense, in terms of evolution also, that we would need to be able to know when something is wrong. I don't know if that's exactly what you're asking. I have a lot of thoughts about it. I find it really interesting, actually. And it's not like 100% foolproof either.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was getting at, is that definitely like the gut biomes give us information about people in our households and our communities.
I also, with the images, I don't know if you encountered this, but something that was shocking to me was the amount of difference that there could be between one person reading it and the other person reading it. You'd have the tech read it, and the tech writes the report up, and that's the report that the doctors get. But then they put it up, and they have their own interpretation. I mean, at one point, we saw a report that had never been shown to us that said that she had a severe fracture in her acetabulum. no one ever told us about this report, because
Mm-hmm.
the doctor who then looked at the x-rays didn't read the first initial report. But so, people saw different things in
Mm-hmm.
those x-rays, and that's what they were basing her whole treatment plan on, was the x-rays, which is crazy. In any situation, you can't base treatment on something like that.
Can you talk about your experience performing as a dancer and an artist, and how do you think that performance or that experience and the tools that you have cultivated as an artist and performer translate to artist mother in life?
Well, I think that, generally in my life, I've been, I'm pretty aware of the roles that I'm performing when I'm performing them. Um, it's something I'm really fascinated by, and have actually made a lot of art around. But, um, certainly when I was interacting with the insurance companies, I was definitely, there was definitely an aspect of pulling on this piece of myself that actually I had never really used much before, but I really had to become quite a bitch. And actually, in every aspect of my life, I kind of became a bitch. And that's not something, I'm a nice person. Like, it's really important to me to be liked. And I just stopped caring, honestly, and I did. I became something that was very foreign to me. I couldn't stand if people wanted to talk about things that weren't relevant. If it was small talk, whatever, I had absolutely no patience for it with almost anyone, really. Um, so there was that, but I also, and I'm gonna just say that so I have a son too. Um, and the year before, so this year was Izzy that happened in February. The previous year in February, also, my son tried to kill himself while he was at school. And I spent a year basically just trying to help him recover, bringing him home. He was on suicide watch for a good 6 months. It's been a long few years, really tough few years. And I certainly, with Izzy, after a few months, I think I hit sort of a bottom, in terms of, I can hardly remember really a lot of it, because I was just functioning. Literally, it got to the point where I could not even think an hour ahead. As things get harder, everything just shrinks. And first it's, you can't plan, the rest of the year, you can't plan next month, and then it's, you can't plan, a week ahead, and then it's like you can't really plan your day, and then it just becomes nothing. It just becomes moment to moment. You just exist. There is nothing else. There's no pretense, because there can't be, because you're literally just surviving moment to moment. And of course, that's not like a flat thing, but I definitely resided there a lot last year. And I think I told Linda at one point, we met and I was talking, and she was saying, how do you see this, affecting your art or your creativity? And I was so angry at the moment, so angry. I didn't want to hear anyone say art. The thought of being creative made me want to throw up. I was so disgusted by all of it, um, which is weird, because that's been
Mm-hmm.
sort of my identity throughout my whole life. As if I was going to say, like, my top most extreme characteristics, that I'm a
Mm-hmm.
very creative person. And I was violently angry at the thought of trying to bring creativity or anything resembling art in any way into what was happening. And again, I think that was a lot of it was anger. I was just so angry at the world, and I had literally no energy left to perform anything. Which is, obviously, we are always performing in a way, but there's a loss there of cognizance of what I was even doing from moment to moment. As much as I was just saying how I was, railing against creativity, obviously, you know, the fact that I was able to think three-dimensionally, I think definitely contributed to the end result of Izzy getting what she needed, because you have to be willing to keep like scratching at that thing you don't understand to keep going, and I think that mothers know that. And I mean, regardless of whether you're an artist or not, like, that you have to keep thinking in every which way you can possibly think, because the answer is not going to be with medical things in particular, the answer is not going to be a straightforward A to B to C, something serious. So certainly that, I don't know, it's hard when I think back upon the year, it was so much about survival for both of us, just surviving each day, each new diagnosis, or, being told first, oh, this is the way it's going to be for the next 5 years, and oh wait, now it's going to be this, or oh wait, actually now it's going to be this. I think it takes a lot of agility to be able to absorb all of that continually changing information and respond to it. But I don't know, that's a difficult question, and one that I think I could answer, I could have answered well a couple of years ago, but my whole concept of art has changed, and performativity and myself has changed so drastically. I don't know. Plus, I don't know, when you're just getting through day by day, it's not like these skills helped me to get through. It's just, you're literally just taking a breath because you have to, or a hard lens for me to look at it under. Because for me, it felt like such a step away from all of that, even consciousness of it. The consciousness was not there at the moment, in the moment. And it's only starting very, like I said, just glimpses starting to, I'm able to look back at it a little bit. But I guess it's a little like the creative process, when you get to the end of the creative process, when things start to get really crazy, and you start thinking that nothing is going to work, that spot where you hit, where you're like, oh, this is horrible, why did I start this in the first place? And then you're scared out of your mind because it's just going to suck.
A big miss.
But you keep going because you have to, and it's almost like you have no choice at that point. It felt like for a lot of it, it felt almost like emotionally, it felt like that, that not having any sense that there was going to be any actual good result, but that you just have to keep going. So I don't know, maybe having gone through that process with in my creative projects helped me to keep going. I don't know just to say that, but
no, that was a good answer. You said your ability to think three-dimensionally. You said agility. You said your ability to look at things from every possible direction. That's 4 things that are relatable from.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, honestly, to me, every project I've ever done, I've gone through that. There are at this point, I've done enough that I know the phases. There's the initial terror, there's the initial fear, which is always for me the yes, you have to do this. And then you work and you work and you work. And then there's always this point where every inch of you is saying, you can't get through, this is not going to work. Pull back, pull back, pull back. And I've always thought that, the defining characteristic of an artist is that they don't. When that happens, they don't. They keep going for whatever freaking reason. They keep going.
Yeah.
And then you make something, you do something,
you use the word agility and just continuing on.
Well, I think, and not to like gender stereotype, but I think moms need that. We have to be agile. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, how can you not be? Especially, my kids have also largely been homeschooled, and you're always juggling a million things that you have to keep track of all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like, when you have medical stuff, it's another whole subset of things that but you still have to juggle the other things too. You have to get, food served 3 times a day for Izzy to make sure she, because she was immobile, and to make sure she got moved to the shower and back and helping her dress and, all of those things. So it's this whole subset of things besides your regular stuff that you're doing. And yeah, I mean, I know my husband was like, I would ask him a question about something that I would expect him to know, he just had no clue about I mean, it wasn't because he didn't want to like know what was going on, but he really had no ability to track any of it. There were so many different things to keep track of. Between the insurance company and all of the different doctors. I had her at 3 different doctors, which was kind of crazy, but I wasn't willing to like I still wanted the varying opinions, and I wanted to give her the best chance of so anyway, like it was crazy, but we were still doing it because it was all I knew to do, and someone had to keep track of all of that. So yeah, I mean, mental gymnastics, we do that all the time as moms, and physical gymnastics too.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
And I guess as a dancer, and a choreographer also, like, it's kind of interesting to see the whole situation as a spatial dance between all of these different roles and agendas and things going on that you're keeping track of, to view that as it's a very complex piece of choreography that you didn't plan ahead of time. It's
Impro.
like more like improv than choreography, but
Yeah.
ends up looking a bit like choreography.
Yeah, that's great. Did you find yourself responding or reacting in any way that you recognized as informed by your own mother or your own childhood?
My mother was very, very distanced growing up, and I did have some health issues. I had a lot of health issues, and I had scoliosis, but really what she basically did was leave me alone in my room when I was not well, which I think it was a different time and people parented differently, but that was how she dealt with it. Interestingly, after a few months of this, when it was clear Izzy was not getting better, especially when it got really bad and we were desperately looking for someone to do this surgery, my mother actually became a really strong ally, which was very unexpected, but she understood that there was no way or I don't know. She understood that I needed help and I wasn't getting it from anywhere. And she really stepped in, and that was amazing, really, to have her as an ally in that, because like I said, a lot of going through this kind of thing is it's so lonely. It's so lonely,
Mm-hmm.
and especially long term, people just can't. I mean, we had a lot of support. I did set up what's it called? Lots of Helping Hands group, and especially after her surgery. It's funny, like after the surgery, it was like people were like, now we can do something because she had surgery. We know what to do. We're going to bring food.
Mm-hmm.
So we came back and there was like tons of food on the doorstep from people I hadn't spoken to. And but I think it gets really uncomfortable for people to talk about illness, to be around people who have illness close to them or injury close to them. And I do understand that, but it's very hard for the people who are going through it, because we really lost our whole community, because you know, people tired of hearing about it. There's nothing else to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what else are you going to talk about? I don't know. There was nothing else going on in my life that I could talk about or experience. Like, that was it. So if you wanted to talk to me, that's what was going to come out,
Mm-hmm.
was the latest outrageous story from the doctors or whatever it was that was happening with Izzy. So yeah, my mom really stepped up, which was great, because she was really the only person that I had then to help get through that really, really tough period.
Yeah.
And also, I think, I don't know about for you, but I think for me, the daughter, it makes me feel small and vulnerable, like a small child again. You know, it's this feeling of being a little girl and not knowing what to do. You know, often as an adult, it's like, oh, we got this. We have experience. We know what to do. You know, you're
Mm-hmm.
used to being, by the time you're an adult, you're like, or at least, I don't know, at least in the past few years, I've started to feel like, okay, you know, I've encountered most things, you know, none of this is like, kind of got most of it figured out. But then when something like, you know, like this happened, and it just made me feel like I was a baby again. Like, I didn't know anything. I was learning it all. I was trying my hardest, but not knowing if what I was doing was right, not knowing what the consequences were. And it made me feel very small. It made me feel like a child, I guess, for the first time in a long time.
Mm-hmm. For me, when after Linda interviewed me and had me recount all of the details and did more inquiry into the details, and I was able to listen to the interview and think about and hear myself responding to her questions. That was a new level of processing the experience that I didn't expect to come from the interview. So, then when Linda was like, now I want you to interview Sharon, I thought, well, I don't know how to create the opportunity for that experience to happen for another person, to like facilitate questions that talk about space and linear, like you mentioned being in a space, like that earlier you were talking about how you can't manage a day, then you can't manage an hour until you're just down to being in that moment. And then you think about, there's a difference between being forced into that mode and like whether you chose it or you were forced into it like a cage. How can it benefit us? And I guess I'm trying to form a question that's like locational and directional, and like how do we control our constricted spaces, and then how do we expand them? Like, how do we move from a constricted space to an expansive space?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm thinking about threat and how much of what we as society do because we feel threatened in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
I think that certainly for me, a lot of that constriction was because of threat. It was because I felt threatened and I was terrified. And I mean, just extrapolating that ability to open is very much based on the release of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just people in general, the way that we constrict in our lives in various ways has so much to do with fear and just being aware of where that fear comes from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've thought about in this process the benefits of fear.
It was interesting, like I said, that period of time where I was battling with insurance companies and doctors. It was probably the last month and a half before her surgery. It was really interesting witnessing the sort of transformation that happened because, like I said, I'm a shy person. I'm a generally like person who really cares about what other people think. I'm always like trying to word things in the best way possible. And it was really fascinating to see that all of that just went away. And not just that it did, that I became like a razor. I mean, it was like, this is what's going to happen, and I made it happen. And I've never been more efficient in my life. I mean, I don't know if everyone thought I was very nice, but in terms of like getting what needed to be done, whereas a few months ago, it might have taken me like 5 hours to get the same result. I immediately knew if I was talking to someone who was going to help me or not. If they weren't, I immediately, went to the next step up. It was like, I think that like tapping into that instinct about what I was saying before, like, don't waste your time with stupid people. It was like, I was listening to that because I had no time for anything else. I had no time to question whether I was right or wrong. I just, and it was almost as though I had a level of sight that I didn't have before. And yeah, I wonder, I think as females, we're definitely told in sometimes not so subtle ways to move away from that. But it's pretty interesting what that can accomplish. That way of being, and it's kind of exhausting. I don't know that I would want to inhabit that being all the time, but to know that like, I don't know, Kali energy is there is pretty intense. It's like to witness that sort of taking over was new for me. I had never really experienced that before to that extent.
Yeah. And how do you think focusing on these newfound strengths or modes of operating can, like, how do you think that might impact your, as you go into the future, or Izzy's life, or how you progress from here?
I haven't really thought about it actually until like we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's great because like I said, I think I really blocked a lot of it out and have been avoiding thinking about it because it was so, it's funny with the coronavirus, everyone, sort of having these miniature anxiety attacks or major anxiety attacks. And for me, it was a relief. Actually, things are the closest they've been to normal since, not because of the shutdowns, but despite the shutdowns, because, my God, compared to last year, I know the world's in a bad place, but like the weight, like the difference in the weight is so enormous. And just, the difficulty of just seeing your kid in pain, struggling constantly, just, it's so exhausting. But yeah, I guess as I was like describing that to you, I was thinking, wow, that's pretty amazing that I have that in me. I never really thought that I did. I would just, I'm not that kind of a person, or, that's not really how I operate. But obviously that was just a piece, that hadn't yet manifested. And I was thinking, wow, if I could figure out how to channel that in other pieces of my life, that would be pretty awesome. Maybe I could like unstick myself a bit.
Yeah.
But I think patience. I think it's a wound. When something like this happens, it's a wound, and you have to grieve, and you have to have patience as it heals, and then I think there are the growth also. But you can't say, well, I'm just going to focus on the good stuff, because you really need to go to the dark places and grieve for loss. There's real loss, and I think that that's equally as important as the beneficial things that might come out of it, or ways that we grow, or whatever. I think it's really important to experience that grief
And that balance, and
yeah.
the ability to go into the grief and pull out the strength, or to allow the time and the patience for the new strengths to emerge out of the grief.
Yeah. I really believe that it is not helpful to force that kind of thing. You just
No.
witness, I guess, is the best word that I have for it. Is a feeling like the best I can do is to
Mm-hmm.
witness the grieving, witness the inability to be very productive at times, you know,
Mm-hmm.
try not to judge it, but just be there with it.
Yeah, I really appreciate Linda facilitating this project because and also allowing the months between what she's like, okay, let's do this. It's okay if it takes 2 months. Let's do these interviews. It's gonna be a video. Let's not do it live, you know.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I think, for me, what's interesting is we could have this same conversation in another couple of months, and I have no idea if it would be at all similar.
Yeah. Having the conversation recorded makes your psyche have to organize itself in a way that's useful more than you
Yeah.
might if you're, just having a casual discussion.
Well, it's been really helpful for me actually, because like I said, this is really the first time that I've talked about it as a whole thing. This has been really interesting, and you've asked some really good questions, which have really made me go back and look at things in different ways, which are very helpful because I think I'm just starting to be able to do that. You know, I really don't know how much I would have been able to do that a few months ago, because even, 3 months ago, I was worried. I mean, this sounds stupid, but she was unable to walk backwards for the first 5 months after her surgery. And I was like, is she never going to be able to move backwards again? Unable to run completely. And, we were told that there might be a chance she would never be able to run again, like things like that. But even a few months ago, I was thinking, oh my God, still in that panic mode of, this is going to be forever. She's never going to be like a normal kid. She's never going to be able to walk without a stick. How am I going to mother this kid that now is permanently disabled? But it's, things have progressed and she's getting better. And so I'm a little more relaxed about it.
Yeah. That's good.
It's a little less, the anxiety keeps dialing down in small bits.
Yeah. That's good. All right. So, this is about the right length of time for our interview to be, and I think we covered a lot of ground and got to a lot of the important points. Is there anything else that you want to say that you can think of?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, she had never been sick, really. Never really been to the doctor, she'd had a cold or a couple of fevers in her lifetime. She's 9 now. So I usually, when she would get a fever in the past, I would just wait it out. We never really went to doctors. I would, of course, if it was an emergency, but we never had to. So in this case, she had a fever on Monday morning, so she stayed home from school, and I just kept taking her temperature that day and thinking that she would probably just have a regular fever, and it would maybe be a couple of days and she would be back in school. By the end of that night, her fever was getting higher. It was like 103 and 104. And the next day, her fever, by the end of the second day, her fever was 105. So I brought her to the emergency room in Kingston, and they took her temperature in the waiting room, and it was 105. And they gave her some Tylenol and Motrin, which I'd been giving her at home also. By the time the doctor got to see her in the emergency room, her fever had come down to about 102.7. And they tested her for strep and the viruses by doing nose and throat swabs. And they sent those into their machine in the lab to determine if she had strep or any viruses. And those came back negative, and they listened to her lungs and they didn't hear anything. So they sent us home saying that she probably just had another type of virus that their machine couldn't detect, and to just continue treating her with Tylenol and Motrin, or ibuprofen. I had the feeling like something was wrong and that they were missing something, and I wasn't like in the right mind frame to say so or speak up. It was like every time I went to form my thoughts and say something to the doctor, it was like he was talking and I just couldn't figure out what I needed to say or wanted to say. It was like I had a feeling something was wrong, but I think I said that I thought that having 105 fever was pretty high for a virus, and he said, "Oh no, it wasn't 105." And I was just thinking, well, it just was in the waiting room with the nurses, but he's saying it wasn't. So there was this weird feeling of like believing him because he was a doctor, but knowing that he was wrong. But he said that she didn't have a fever of 105 with such authority. So when we left, I was really irritated by that whole experience. And the next morning, she was still not better. I would look at her and she would kind of look like she was blue. And then I'd look again and she didn't look blue. So it was again this like feeling of, am I correct in that? It was like a continual process of like checking in with my perceptions and like not knowing what was real and not really trusting myself, but also being a person who has like experienced a lot of things that have caused me to learn to trust myself. So it was like a whole nother level of that way of being. So I took her to the pediatrician that afternoon, and by that time she'd had a rash on her body and her mouth looked weird, and she had been throwing up all day and not able to keep any fluid down. And he tested her again for strep, and his machine said that she tested positive for strep, and he said it looked like she had scarlet fever because she had a rash all over herself and her tongue was white. So he gave her some amoxicillin to take, and I thought, oh, well, good, so it was something. I knew it was something. So I was feeling hopeful that she would take these antibiotics, and he said they would work really quickly and that she would like turn around pretty quickly, that scarlet fever isn't really as big of a scary deal as it sounds, that it responds really well to the antibiotics and she should feel better the next morning. So she still wasn't able to keep any fluid down. She was looking like blue and green and really pale and really lethargic. Her breathing was starting to be really rapid, and it seemed like she was in pain, and she kept saying she had pain in her lung. I didn't know it was her lung then. I thought she was having pain in her stomach. That's where she was indicating. So we got home and I tried to give her the antibiotic and she just threw it up. So I called the doctor and said, well, how long does it have to stay in her stomach in order for it to have gotten into her system? And they said, oh, it should be fine. Just give her another one in the morning. So I was just sort of getting her ready to try to go to sleep and hoping that in the morning we would wake up and she would be better, or at least starting to be better. But I had this feeling like, oh, maybe I should take her into the hospital again because something just didn't seem right. So I kept going back and forth with that thought, just wait until morning, she'll be better. No, you should take her in again. But then also, we've already been to 2 doctors and they've sent us home. It just felt sort of ridiculous to be going to a 3rd emergency room after hours. Already missed the fact that she had strep and sent us home and said she had nothing wrong with her. And I was really on the fence about going back to the hospital because I just felt like they were going to say, oh, nothing's wrong, go home and wait it out. But I think this is the scariest part of it, is that I almost didn't go to the hospital. I decided to go anyway to Poughkeepsie, but which was a half an hour drive, but I knew it was a better hospital. And by the time we got there, there was all kinds of Christmas traffic because it was night and it was December 16th or 17th. She wasn't able to walk or move and she had turned blue. We pulled into the parking lot and I didn't know if I should just call 911, but I was in the hospital parking lot. So I just hoisted her onto my back and firemen carried her from the parking garage to the hospital where I could see it was dark and windy and the parking lot was vacant. It seemed like there were no street lamps. So it just seemed really time slowed down, I was carrying this near lifeless child through this parking lot towards this just light of the entrance of the hospital. And I went in the front entrance and they said, this isn't the emergency room, it's around the other side of the building. So I just quickly turned around and started running as fast as I could with her on my back. And we had to traverse, the side of this giant hospital in the dark. We were going through alleyways with dumpsters, it seemed. And there was just no one around. And it just seemed really unbelievable. And, one of those moments when time is stretching out and you're just aware of the urgency and ridiculousness of your situation. So I got into the emergency room door, which was around the other side of the building. It was a really small entrance. And they wheeled up a wheelchair behind me and I plunked her down into it. And they saw that she was blue and not moving and didn't really look alive, so they quickly hooked her up to a monitor and it said her heart rate was 180 and her oxygen level was 58 or something, really low. And they kept hitting the machine saying, this can't be right, this can't be right. And a couple of them were just kind of taking their time trying to get the machine to be accurate. And then one nurse came rushing out, and she was like, "The machine's fine. Get Dr. The pediatrician who was on call there. I forget his name." And they rushed her right back there, and they immediately gave her a shot of vancomycin. She had gone septic, and they didn't know initially what was wrong with her. They were asking all kinds of questions, like if she'd been exposed to something, and they just put her in the ambulance, and I got in the front of the ambulance, and we rode to Westchester Hospital. And they put her in the intensive care unit for children, and we didn't know what was happening at that point. They gave her a ultrasound of her body, and it showed that her left lung was full of pus, and they couldn't hear that neither the emergency room or the doctor's office could hear that for some reason when they listened to her chest. I guess because it was so full. So they drained her lung the next morning by putting her unconscious and putting a tube in. And then they showed me a picture of the x-ray, and it was, you could see her esophagus like going off at like a 45-degree angle from her throat, and her heart was shoved up into her left shoulder area because her lung was so full of pus that it was like displacing her heart and her esophagus. It was like the worst looking x-ray I've ever seen. Like a person's body parts like all in the wrong spot. And it was just this like feeling of time being altered and not having any control over the situation, and just like knowing that I needed to be fine with that. I think this whole situation is sort of in another compartment. It's like frozen there for the sake of reflection or like just study, because I don't think I could go around each day actually with this memory in my, like the memory and awareness that I use in my everyday life. So it still feels kind of unreal and as if it never happened, and also as if it was like no big deal at all, or also as if it was like a life-changing event, like there was life before this and then there's life after this. So it has like, I don't know if it just hasn't been enough time, but it's not settled. It feels like the time that we spent in the hospital could have been like an entire year. It could have been like 20 years ago, or 3 years ago, or yesterday. It feels like it could have been much longer or much shorter. It could have been 3 days, or it could have been an entire year. Like the time around it and having to do with everything having to do with this is just like warped in some kind of time and space way. Yeah, I thought about this a lot because I was talking with you, Linda, on the phone. Most days we would check in and you would ask how we were doing, and we kept in close touch. And I remember, I don't know how many years ago it was, but I was talking to you about this time that Sylvia and I were in the grocery store, and she was throwing a tantrum, and my cart was full of groceries, and I just like had to abandon the cart and leave. These really like difficult mothering moments. And you said something like, what would the mother that you would want to be, how would that mother be performing, and how could you perform as a mother in that situation? And I remember like having this huge realization when you said that I had a choice over how I responded to Sylvia, that I could perform in that moment as a mother having a child who's having a tantrum in the grocery store. And just this realization that performance could be like a, not really, well, I've thought, that could be like a coping mechanism. But it's not really a coping mechanism, it's like a mechanism. So ever since that point, I've really used that performance mechanism in my mothering, because I really had to, because we wind up in so many difficult situations. And it's not performance in a way of like being perfect. It's like what is my role here, and then embracing that role. And that really creates, that mechanism of awareness really creates the ability to like view multiple possibilities and then choose one. And then even if that possibility that you chose isn't working out, you're still able to step out of that role, view 100 more possibilities, and choose another one. So it gave me this really maneuverable framework for like navigating mothering and life. And so I already had been sort of practicing that in a way that like became very natural to my just daily way of going about, that I didn't realize until this latest hospital experience how much I rely on that mechanism as a mother and as an artist, and like all throughout my life. It's now something that informs my choices and my awareness about my art making projects, situations and circumstances I find myself in life, and just, or if I'm like envisioning or conceptualizing different possibilities. That sort of performance mechanism that you introduced me to has really informed my approach to mothering and life and art. And so that was one of my like big realizations in this process, or in this experience. I can't even express the the web that we all became. People coming and going, and so many people were involved and connected and just wanting to help in so many ways and helping in so many ways that it was like, well, I was, I'm not like a person who's able to just sit around, and there wasn't a lot of sleeping over the 17 days, but it was Christmas, and we had construction paper. We were making daisy chains and decorating the room, and the room became like filled with like hanging paper chains and cutouts, and it just became a really exciting room that way. We were studying all the different antibiotics that she was on and what their scope of treatments were, which things they would kill and which things they wouldn't, like making lists and crossing off things, because the doctors didn't really, they weren't able to really identify what bacteria had caused the lung to fill up. So I was, trying to figure that out by processes of elimination, and that became these long lists, and learning about how antibiotics can have antagonistic effects on one another, and it seemed like the two that they were giving her were like partially canceling each other out, and they would add a third one and the fever still wouldn't come down and the white blood cells would still go higher, and she was on 3 antibiotics and it was just getting worse. And it was like definitely entering science mode, definitely entering like busybody mode of just like manipulating material with my hands nonstop, talking to people, just really being outside of myself. And I was remembering I'd worked many years ago in search and rescue in Yosemite Valley, and it was a similar thing that happens where there's like an emergency and you just get down to doing the work. And that I remember that time shifts, like time stops, and you just have like, it's like everything's in slow motion. So I guess as a scientist and an artist who's thinking and working with perception, in this case, I'm still stuck thinking about the role of perception and like why we perceive these like certain situations, why time is warped and bent, like for what purpose, and what parts of us make that happen, and how can we control that or maximize it. I think my dad was a gymnast and an acrobat and a trampolinist, and so from the time I was little, he would be tossing me up in the air and like having me balance on his hands. We would be doing like hand balancing and acrobatic things, and training me on trampoline and I would be launching myself through the air. So I was really, had this, I think maybe in a way that puts a person outside of their body. So I had this like really strong sense of my physical body and an equally strong sense of the space outside of my physical body. So it's almost like I inhabited 2 spaces. So I think it created the ability to see myself from outside, which is why, like when you introduced the idea of like choosing roles, that was like a really like surprisingly simple thing, like, oh, I had never, as much as I'd been able to like see myself from outside my body, I had never imagined this like possibility of seeing that self make choices. So, as much as I have these like experience of being outside my body sort of naturally, I'm missing a lot of experiences that seem very natural for other people that have to do with awareness of choice. So I think it has its pluses and minuses. Being not disconnected, but like having a sense of the outside of the bodiness. No, I've thought about this like in relationship to having been a trampolinist, because I remember when I was maybe 15 or 16, I had quit gymnastics and I just wanted to focus on trampoline. So I was learning these really complicated skills on the trampoline. One of them was a double twisting, double backflip, which you do like in succession with a bunch of other tricks. So it requires like jumping up in the air and flipping around 2 times while you spin around 2 times. So it takes these really tiny muscle movements, and you're going really high in the air. And it's so many tiny movements that it feels like you have a year when you're up in the air doing that trick. Like I can still, even to this day, feel the like microscopic movements inside of my body that you need to do in order to make that trick happen. Yet, in that split second, the amount of time it takes to perform that trick, it expands, and it seems like you have like maybe an entire minute or 5 minutes or something. So we used to use video cameras to record ourselves, and you could see this just human going up in the air and spinning around really quickly and then landing. And then when you slow motion the thing down, you can see, oh, my elbow was sticking out and I need to pull my elbow in. Or you just saw these like really microscopic things that you needed to do with your body, like just tuck your chin in like a quarter of an inch or something. So I thought about this when I was studying body work, and I forget which practitioner was talking about like people who had been in car accidents where their body like comes to a direct halt, like they've been speeding and then the physical body comes to a quick halt, that the like maybe this etheric or energy body like continues to move past the car and outside of their body. Then their energy body like didn't come to a halt. It just kept kind of gliding into the space in front of them. So I thought about like my experience as a trampolinist and like this, high impact kind of jumping and just being in the air is as like maybe that was happening. So it's like you wouldn't call it like traumatic experience because you were choosing to do it and you didn't usually get hurt, but it caused this similar thing that to the outside body that maybe happens when people are in car crashes or other like high impact like injuries or something. So yeah, just the perception of time being weird and altered, and the perception of the body, the physical body and the outer bodies. I mean, I know this from going through things like this in the past, that it gives me this ability to be really clear in my impulses and my choices and my instincts, like to recognize when an instinctive notion is occurring and to like direct it really quickly and to not question myself. So I think maybe all of these sort of difficult experiences in my life are just continually like fortifying that mechanism of like choice making and like embracing and owning decisions and actions, where there's not really a lot of like, it's like it's been training me to function in this way where it's like just sort of following impulse, but also the impulses have been correct in a lot of ways. Or it's like they're getting to be better. Like they're not always correct or the most useful or the most beneficial thing, but it's like honing that mechanism to where I feel like eventually a person, if they keep going through stuff like this for their whole life, might be able to direct that process really effectively. They have these slogans like, "We operate on Occam's razor." They would say like, our protocol is developed based on Occam's razor. The most likely scenario is the most probably it, or something. Like all of our decisions are informed by protocol. We don't. They don't use like, if they have a hunch or a notion, they have to like bend their protocol to like sort of force their a way for their instinct. Where operating as an artist, I might have an instinct or a notion, and I have to sort of force some sort of rules of physical material to suit my notion. So I could see just that they have like this comfort in being like fencing themselves in with this, because dealing with like life or death, when you're really on the very edge of like making decisions on whether a child lives or dies, you can't as a human be like making a quick instinctive decision, because you're not going to be 100% correct. So they have to put these parameters in place to protect themselves from, accidentally killing children. They're like working with something that's way more important, I guess. Maybe not way more important, but it's like, it's much different than like, oh, I'm going to make a sculpture and the welds didn't hold. I had the welder set on 4 or something. It's like, oh, I made a mistake, but it doesn't, like, nobody's going to live or die because I like chose the wrong color, or my seams didn't hold, or someone disagreed with what I was doing, or misunderstood, or didn't like none of those things. Like as an artist, being misunderstood, like worst case scenario, you do a project, no one understands it, everyone misunderstands it, being it fails or something. It's like, so fucking what? There's no children who just died, so it doesn't really matter. So I guess that's sort of liberating. I mean,
It makes us glad to be artists.
I guess so. I mean, not to say that it's just frivolous. I mean, I think we're all searching for like real useful ways of going about that translate to like how to live life effectively. And that can like save lives. But yeah, it's probably great if we have that level of care and awareness and ability with everything we do in our lives.
Right.
And I agree, because even, I mean, I guess on the surface it doesn't seem like anybody lives or dies based on any of my successes or failures with all of my art projects. But they're little like spirit ideas. They're like spirit babies or something. So it's, I mean, I guess it would just be like if we were to decide that human beings were different or more important than like idea babies or spirit babies. It's probably not true that there's like a hierarchy and that one is more important than the other. Yeah, and that's really sticking with me more and more as I know you and am influenced by you, that there really is no difference between my life projects and my art projects, and that they both deserve equal levels of integrity. I've made a point of, I have my observations of she and I's relationship, and I try to be really clear in not articulating her experience as my experience, or like my observation of her experience may not be correct. So I kind of refrain from imposing my observation of her experience or what it might be. I mean, I witnessed her working with certain things in this circumstance, like, you know, like being confronted with things that she had no choice over. Like, kids are given a lot of encouragement in this, era lately, that they have choice and that they have choices about their bodies and what things they say are okay and what things are not okay, that they need to like make good choices and use their voice and make these choices. So she's been raised that way, except in this case she was put in a position where she didn't have any choice. Like, they had to take blood when they had to, and they had to like they just had to do stuff to her that she didn't choose and she didn't want to. And so it was difficult for me to watch that sort of reckoning, and then to realize, oh, we've been wanting to like give our kids this like idealized notion that they have choice and autonomy and that their body is theirs, and it's all great and well-meaning things, except in a case like this, you have to also be able to give over, like to be in control of the things that you can control, and to know have the ability to know when you don't have a choice, and to be able to be okay. So I think that she's 9. She hasn't had many experiences like that. So watching her like have a crash course in that is one thing that I noticed. And as far as she and I's relationship, that's a tough one to speak about. We're still so connected that we sort of have a understanding of each other and our relationship to each other that's a little bit unlanguageable. Just feeling and knowing each other in a way that is still really like instinctive and like connected in some like sphere that doesn't have language. And then also experiencing the stuff that does have language, like just being really tired of whining and regular mother things, like just needing her to do what you're asking her to do, and just being really tired with those regular sorts of parenting things. He was just continually there, like there wasn't a question of whether he would be there for us, he just was. And that was really comforting, and the feeling of I didn't even have to ask, and there was no like resentment. It was just straight up like unconditional help and support. Neither of us, I mean, we were tired, but that wasn't even an issue. So I think just having another person there was really great, and really gave me a lot of stability and comfort. And Sylvia too, just he was able to a lot of times diffuse things that were happening, or when I was really fizzling, then he would pick up and start reading books to her and stuff. Or just having the ability to like collapse a little bit and know that somebody else was going to be there. So
If you were to interview Nina right now, what would you ask her about this experience?
I would ask her, like, how is she gonna be better the next time this happens? What is the thing to carry and learn for the next thing? And I don't even know if there's a way to answer that because it just will evolve over time. How will she... I wonder if these spheres of reality will over time converge. And how would she know if that has happened, and what would it matter? I guess the experience is kind of fragmented from my awareness. I notice when I have to start to retell the facts of this experience, that they're kept in another compartment of my awareness that's really far from the awareness I use to go around on my daily life. That I wonder if there will come a point when the distance between those two modes of functioning becomes closer. She would say, why does that matter? The distance between those things. Why are you fascinated with where things are, like the location of perceptions? Why do you care so much about wanting to know where things are and how they get from one place to another? Yeah, it was a perspective shift. Like all these things that I was, at the same time we were in the hospital, my septic system was blowing up in my house. And, you know, before we went to the hospital, that was a terrible ordeal. And, you know, I hired this plumber. It was $300, not fixed. Hired another guy, $900, kind of fixed. You need another thing, it's going to be $8,000. And then that very day, your septic needs to be rebuilt, $8,000. We go to the hospital. Like, I was on the verge of caring about that. And, you know, in relationship to something like this, that just, those sort of things that would otherwise be a really big deal in a person's life just doesn't matter. Like, I don't know how that will happen, but it just will. I don't even care right now. We're just not using much water for now. It's fine. So then all these other things like, oh, we hit a deer, we had to have my car repaired, or just all these other things that at other points in my life would be like, oh, this is terrible. Why is all this terrible stuff happening? And now it's like nothing. Like, it doesn't even matter. Like, none of this stuff that used to seem as if it matters.
You had a perception shift, and you had a life shift, and you had a very, very powerful life-death journey, endurance.
Maybe the distance between those spheres of perception that I was trying to like measure and locate will become evident when I go back to being comfortable and I get to the point where I start to get mad about some stupid thing. Like, I'm thinking of my neighbor lady was angry because we drove on her lawn and it made a dent in her yard. She was so mad. And I could just sit there while she was yelling at me thinking, like, wow, she cares about different things than I do. And so maybe when the experience, the like near-death experiences and the mundane idiocy of like daily life problems like holes in your yard, when those things start to become so far apart that you can't see the like near-death experience anymore and you start to care about like a hole in your yard or something, that maybe things like that can like indicate distance. I don't know if it would mean they were like getting closer together or farther.
La, la.